Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another DC Capstone Report podcast. This week on the podcast, we're going to take a look at the defensive side of the football as we head into spring practice. In the first segment, we're going to take a look at some the defensive actual philosophy for this coming year and see what the defense might be doing to improve on last year's performance. In our second segment on the podcast, we're going to take a look at some of the actual defensive players to watch as we go into spring practice, what they might do, and then in the final and third segment, we're going to take a look at who we might want to see coming out of spring practice ahead in some of the rotations and where they might actually be playing on the field. The DC Capstone Report is featured each Tuesday morning on Tide 102.9, The Morning Blitz with Martin Houston. You can listen live at Tide1029.com. Well, it's glad to be back for another week of the DC Capstone Report. Hope you enjoyed last week's podcast on the offense. Today we turn our attention to the defensive side of the football heading into spring practice. We're already in March. I know it doesn't feel like it out there with all the cold weather that's hit us here in Alabama. But this week on Friday, March 8th, begins spring practice. We'll have one day of spring practice. Then they'll be off for spring break. And then they'll pick up on their other practices beginning on when they get back in town on the 18th and leading up to our April the 13th spring game. So what do we look for on the defensive side of the ball? Well, I think everyone has agreed that last year's defense may not have been the best that Alabama's put on the field. However, I think that they did a great job coming out of a year where they had to replace so many people that left and going to the NFL. So overall, I don't think it was a poor performance. I just think that it just wasn't up to par to all the top-notch defenses that Alabama has been putting on the field. Part of that had to do with our offensive philosophy. So I look at this year coming in this spring practice, we want to look hard at our offense to kind of help our defense. What do I mean by that? I want to see what our offensive philosophy is heading in this spring practice to see if, in my opinion, I believe what we're going to do is going to come in with more of a ball control offense that by no means ignores the pass, but sets the pass up by running the ball, which will in turn give us more ball control to keep our defense off the field. And if we can do that and give our defense a little help, I think it'll be good for us down the road as we play against some of the top-notch offenses down the road. Our defense will be in much better shape to do that. Well, our philosophy on defense, I think, is not going to change much under Coach Saban. I think we're going to have just a really good defensive backfield. Maybe one of our stronger points this year. It was one of our weaker points going into last year, but they really developed. We got some good defensive backs coming back. We got some other players that will get in there and play. I think our defensive line and our defensive outside linebackers could be a strong point on defense as well. I believe that they'll be able to do a really good job and contribute. I think maybe the weakest link coming into this year on defense will be our middle linebackers. We really didn't groom anyone to come in. Before this time, we look back on many years past, there was always a Reggie Ragland, a Reuben Foster, a C.J. Mosley, or someone to come in, Rashawn Evans to come in that's groomed to take over a role. And I think this past year, we really don't have that other person to step up. Mac Wilson going on to the pros. In my opinion, I thought he would have been served well to come back this year, but he chose to go into the pros, and that may be seen if that was a good decision or not, depending on where he gets picked. But that just leaves Dylan Moses with the only middle linebacker, inside linebacker with any experience coming in. So I think how we fill those gaps and fill those voids in spring practice is going to be something we really need to watch. Well, what does that mean about the overall defensive philosophy? I think some of the coaching changes that we've seen with Tosh Lapoy going on to the pros, and now we have Pete Golden being our defensive coordinator. I think you got Charles Kelly coming in with a lot of good defensive experience, and both in the NFL and in the college game. You got Brian Baker coming in with a lot of wealth of knowledge on the defensive line, both in the pros and in the college game. Then you got Sal Sunseri coming in with a great experience with Coach Saban's scheme and being able to translate that and teach it down to the players. So I think the coaching philosophy is going to change just a little bit. I look for a little more aggressive defensive style than we might have seen last year. I think one of our strong suits will be defensive line and our defensive ends or our outside linebackers rushing the quarterback. We didn't get as strong a push, I think, last year as we wanted to on some situations, especially during the games where we played some really good offensive lines and some good quarterback play. The way we attack that this year, I think, will be putting more pressure on the quarterback. And I think there'll be an emphasis on our defensive line or outside linebackers to do that. I think overall we're not going to change our scheme as we cover. I think it'll be Coach Saban's defensive backfield scheme that they've always given. I think they'll play, as we've seen, the base defense against those running teams. They'll play the nickel and the dime rabbits in formations against some of the passing teams that we play. Overall, though, I think we have an opportunity to be a better defensive team than we were last year. I think last year's defense took a while to catch up with our offense. I think the running, the passing style, and the what they call the whole fun and gun RPOs that we did on offense to get the ball down the field fast really didn't give our defense much time to rest. They were young. By the time we got to the end of the season, I think we've heard from several players who said that last game against Clemson, our team was just spent. I think our defense was really giving out, and it showed in that game as we got really manhandled during that last long 10-play drive that Clemson had against us. So I look for turn the tables on that, and it begins with spring practice. I think our conditioning will be second to none, as it always is under Coach Cochran. And I think this influx of new defensive experience coming in with the coaches that I've named is really going to make a difference. Now, how that translates to the players and the incoming players will remain to be seen. But I look for this defense to really, really get a good walkthrough in the scheme-wise and early in spring practice. And I wouldn't be surprised that if our defense doesn't compete very well against our offense during the spring game. So let's look for our defense to improve. Look for them to take advantage of the new coaches that we've got coming in, and look for them to find players to fill the spots that need to be found. And we'll concentrate more on that in our second segment upcoming.
You have been listening to the DC Capstone Report. The DC Capstone Report is brought to you each time this week by RollTideBama.com and FreelancePitchers.com.
Well, in our second segment on the podcast today, we've been talking about the defense. Now in the second segment, we want to concentrate on some players. What are some of the players on the defensive side of the ball that we're going to need to look for in spring practice? What are areas? Who you see stepping up? Well, I think you start with the defensive line. We lost some great defensive line talent there in Quinion Williams and Isaiah Buggs. And just as a side note, if you watched anything about the Combine, NFL Combine, Quinion Williams just showed out in that Combine. I don't think that he was given enough credit for what he did in that big of a man, moving that fast and showing the skills that he had. He is a talent among all the talents Alabama's had that might end up being one of the highest picks in the draft ever for the University of Alabama. I don't say it's a long shot that he might be the number one pick. It just depends on what the need is there at the number one pick. But Quinion Williams is that good. So replacing him is going to be difficult. Good thing about it is one of our most depth as we rotate a lot of players in on the defensive line is on that line and the people who are coming back. You got Raekwon Davis, and I think he is a player that have maybe a breakout year as his senior year. I think he made the right decision in coming back. I think he'd have gotten lost in the NFL draft with all the talent and the defensive line out there. So whoever was advising him gave him some great advice to come back for another year. So I look for Raekwon Davis to be an anchor on our defensive line. I really look for him to up his game. And he'll make more sacks, I think more tackles, and he'll be able to play with a sense of passion this year in his senior year. Behind him, you got LeBron Ray and Fadarian Mathis, who played a lot last year. Both of them are set to contribute this year. It's good to watch them in spring practice to see kind of where they are. Tavita Masika, he actually was a transfer that came in, played a little bit at the nose guard position. So look for him to have an opportunity to play this year. Two players that we heard a lot about during the scout team, and they got to work with Stephon Wynn and Christian Barrymore. Christian Barrymore, that is a player that I'll talk about a little bit in my third and final segment when we start talking on isolating players you think will step up. But he did so much during the last season during the practices on the scout team to really impress some folks. And so I look for him to step up on the defensive line and play good as well. Got some people coming in to look at. Antonio Alfano, Justin Bogaby, and DJ Dale are some of the ones that will be coming in. Can any of those signees come right in and make a difference in the defensive side of the ball, defensive line play? So I've heard that Antonio Alfano is that top-notch player. He's that 5-star that really has the build, really has the opportunity to come in and make a contribution early on. So look for him coming out of the spring practice as well. Well, at the defensive line, you got to look at your outside linebackers. Another wealth of experience coming back from. We got Anthony Jennings coming back. You got Terrell Lewis, Chris Allen, who were injured. Those two coming back. We got Inyabi Anoba, who played last year, coming back. So we've got some really good linebacking core. Cameron Latua played over there last year and got some reps in. So we got some really good outside linebackers, defensive ends, rushers, and I look to use those. And maybe you might see one of those that are if everybody stays healthy. The spring practice might be what's called one of those experiments in the deep, where you move one of those outside linebackers to middle linebacker, inside linebacker, where we have a little bit of a depth problem. So that'll be something to watch also in the spring practice. Moving back to the middle linebacker, which I've already said is a depth problem. Right? You got Dylan Moses, of course, but after Dylan Moses, who is the person that's going to have? Jalen Moody, some Markel Benton had some snaps last year, but neither one of them had many. So we got to find somebody coming up, and who that next person is going to be, not really sure. You may have to have one of the incoming freshmen fill a place there, or like I said, one of those linemen, outside linebackers. A player to watch there maybe is Cameron Latou. I think last year he was moved to outside linebacker because that was a weak spot. I think he can probably play both the weak side, inside linebacker, and the outside linebacker position. So I think maybe you see him play, maybe in situational work, maybe in that down rabbits formation, just opportunities for him to make a contribution. So he might be one of the watching spring practice that gets moved out there. And then you got our defensive backs. So coming back on the defensive backs, lose Deontay Thompson, probably one of the best safeties we've ever had at Alabama, as far as his range and his speed. But you got Shyam Carter coming back. You got you got Jaron Maiden. You got some cornerbacks in Trayvon Diggs, Patrick Surtain. You got Nigel Knott. So there are some folks that are there that's got some experience to really make a difference. And I think that of all those I've named, Cheyenne Carter is probably going to be the one that leads that defensive backfield. So I think all of those are players to watch in spring practice, and let's just see how they react. We talk about them all day long, but until you see them playing on the field, in that first scrimmage and get some feedback, we really don't know how they're going to be. But I think these are all positions to watch during this spring for on the defensive side of the ball. Well, here on the final segment of our podcast today, who are the people who are going to come out of this spring where you're going to say, hey, didn't know about him? That's somebody that we can look forward to seeing play on Saturdays for the Tide this coming year on the defensive side of the ball. Well, last year it had to be Quinton Williams. He was the man. Hardly ever heard of. Go from last year this time at spring practice to this year this time, talking about possibly being the number one player taken in the NFL draft. Now that is a great wide jump for anybody. But I remember last year people talking early on before spring practice, hey, you got to look at this kid, Quinton Williams. And then I got to see him on the field at the spring day. And I told my wife then, I looked at her and I said, look, that kid there has such a great upside. I wouldn't be surprised to see him contribute. And boy, I was right. He contributed early and made a difference, and look where he's come from. So who is that person this year? Let's highlight and look at a couple of players on the defensive side of the ball and see who that might be. In my opinion, the one name that I've heard over and over coming out of last year is Christian Barmore. And I think on the defensive line, he could be the next Quinton Williams to step up and make an impact. So look for him in spring practice. Let's see what he's doing. Is there an opportunity for him to step up and have make a name for himself? And if so, can he break in that? Can he break in that starting rotation with LeBron Ray and Fendarian Mathison and Raekwon Davis? Is there room for Christian Barmore to move in there and maybe take over that Quinton Williams role? So I think that's one name to watch. Another name to watch in the outside linebackers, defensive end, is Antonio Alfano. I think Alfano has been talked about as an edge rusher. and I wouldn't be. He's counting on his defensive line, but I wouldn't be surprised him to move outside and make a difference as an edge rusher. To me, I've been told he has all the skills to come in. Well, I want to know, is he what everybody's cracked up to be? Is he the player everybody thinks he is? So a good person to watch coming out of this spring practice is, can Alfano distance himself, separating himself from the other defensive 5-stars and make an impact contribution early on. Another player to watch, in my opinion, is Cameron Latou. I think last year he moved to the outside linebacker position. I think he was a natural weak inside linebacker. We had more depth, lack of depth at outside linebacker position simply because had all those people that were injured. He moved out there a little bit to give them some help out there. I think him or Ali Cahoe, Cameron Latou, Ali Cahoe are the two players to watch in the middle linebackers place. Can they supplant Jalen Moody or Markel Benton? Who is going to be the step up? Would it be Benton or Moody, or would it be somebody like Cahoe or Latou? So look for those names coming out of that inside linebacker core to complement Dylan Moses. Another thing to watch on the defensive side of the ball is there anyone that's playing that's already there on the team, not an incoming freshman, but been there? Is there anybody that can step up and make a difference? One name I'd like to throw out there, I talked a little bit about him last year, and I think he needed a year to just get into the system and get physically fit, increase his size and his stamina, and that is Jerez Parks. That's another name I want you to look for in spring practice. I believe he has an opportunity to be much like a Christian Barrymore and make a difference on the defensive side of the ball. So there's our kind of overview of our defense. Look forward to see exactly what Alabama has in store on the defensive side of the ball, and look forward to the spring practices. As they happen, we'll bring you more updates as we can during this spring and during this off season.
You have been listening to the DC Capstone Report. The DC Capstone Report is brought to you each time this week by RollTideBama.com and FreelancePictures.com. Be sure to go online and check us out on DCCapstoneReport.com for future updates.